She was homeless. He was untouchable. When a roadside repair reveals a ring that shouldn't exist, a mafia boss discovers that the greatest miracle isn't survival, it's a second chance. The merciless Nevada sun bled gold across the desert highway that evening, making the asphalt shimmer like molten glass. A black Lincoln Navigator sat abandoned on the shoulder, its hood propped open like the jaws of a dying beast. Edward Wallace, a man whose name alone made people in Las Vegas lower their voices, stood beside the vehicle in his $1,000 suit, barking into his phone. "I don't care if you have to steal a tow truck. I've been stranded on this godforsaken road for 3 hours." He checked his gold Patek Philippe, jaw tightening. "I have a meeting with the commissioner in 2 hours. 2 hours. Figure it out." He ended the call with a curse, shoving the phone into his pocket. The Wallace syndicate didn't wait for anyone, and he certainly didn't have time to be marooned in the middle of nowhere because some GPS shortcut had failed him. Edward ran a hand through his graying hair, scanning the empty horizon. Nothing but sand, scrub brush, and heat waves for miles. Then he heard it, the soft crunch of gravel underfoot. He turned sharply. A woman was approaching from the east, walking along the roadside like some desert phantom. Thin, dust-covered, barefoot. Her jeans were torn at the knees, her tank top faded and stained with sweat. A face that might have been beautiful once, now weathered by too many nights under open sky and too many missed meals. Edward's first instinct was caution. Out here, you never knew who might be desperate enough to try something stupid. His hand drifted instinctively toward the concealed carry at his waist. But the woman didn't seem dangerous. She seemed exhausted, like she'd been walking for days. She slowed when she saw him, her eyes flicking from his face to the steaming Lincoln and back again. For a moment, Edward thought she might just keep walking. His late wife, Isabella, had always told him not to dismiss people who looked like they had nothing. "Those are the ones who see everything," she'd said. But this woman wasn't Isabella. Isabella was dead. "Car trouble?" the stranger asked, her voice soft but steady. Edward let out a dry laugh, gesturing at the open hood. "Unless you're a certified mechanic, sweetheart, I don't think you can help." The woman tilted her head slightly, studying him with an unreadable expression. "I used to be." Before he could respond, she stepped past him and moved to the front of the Lincoln. She leaned over the engine, eyes scanning the maze of hoses and belts with practiced efficiency. "Who taught you?" Edward asked, more curious than hopeful. "My uncle ran a garage," she said without looking up. "Taught me everything before he drank himself to death." Edward smirked despite himself. "Well, that's a hell of a recommendation." She ignored the comment, pointing at a thin stream of liquid pooling beneath the car. "Coolant leak. Your radiator hose is cracked, and your fan belt's about to snap. You overheat again in the next 15 miles, you'll blow the whole engine." Edward blinked. "How the hell would you know that?" She straightened, brushing a strand of matted hair from her face. "Because I've been fixing cars longer than I've been sleeping under bridges." There was no bitterness in her tone, just fact. Edward watched as she crouched beside the front wheel, examining the undercarriage. "What's your name?" he asked suddenly. "Shirley," she said, glancing up. "Shirley MacDonald." She extended a hand, calloused, dirt-streaked, but firm. Edward hesitated only a second before shaking it. "Edward Wallace." If the name meant anything to her, she didn't show it. "You got any tools in this thing, Mr. Wallace?" Shirley asked, already moving toward the back of the Lincoln. "Glove box, maybe the trunk." She rummaged through his emergency kit, pulling out a roll of electrical tape and a small wrench. "This'll hold temporarily. You'll need a real repair in town, but it should get you there." Edward stood back, arms crossed, watching with growing fascination as she worked. Her movements were quick, confident, no hesitation. Within minutes, she'd patched the hose and tightened the belt. When she turned the key he'd left in the ignition, the engine purred back to life. "You're lucky I came by," Shirley said, wiping her hands on her jeans. "Luck," Edward muttered. "That's one word for it." It was then, just as she raised her hand to push the hood closed, that the fading sunlight caught something on her finger. Edward's breath stopped. A ring. Silver. Worn. Tarnished from years of exposure. But unmistakable. A serpent coiled around a rose. The world seemed to tilt. The desert heat. The engine hum. The endless highway. All of it faded into static. That ring had belonged to Isabella, his late wife. The woman he'd lost 12 years ago in a car explosion meant for him. Edward's hand shot out, gripping Shirley's wrist, not rough, but urgent. "Where did you get that ring?" His voice was low, trembling despite every effort to control it. Shirley frowned, pulling her hand back slightly. "This? It was my mother's. Why?" Edward's pulse hammered in his ears. "Your mother's name. What was it?" She hesitated, eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Isabella," she said slowly. "Isabella MacDonald. Why does it matter?" The ground seemed to drop out from under him. Isabella MacDonald. That had been her maiden name, the name she'd used before she became Isabella Wallace. Before she became his wife. Before she died. Edward stared at the woman in front of him. At the dust, the exhaustion, the haunted eyes. At the ring that shouldn't exist. At the name that couldn't be coincidence. "How old are you?" he whispered. 28. The math aligned perfectly. The woman standing before him, homeless, forgotten, lost to the world, wasn't a stranger. She was Sophie, his daughter, the child who'd died in the same explosion that killed her mother. Or so he'd been told. Edward's hands trembled as he stepped back, his mind reeling. "That's impossible," he said, barely audible. "My daughter—" He couldn't finish, couldn't say the word died out loud. Not again. Shirley watched him warily, her hand instinctively covering the ring. "Look, I don't know what this is about, but—" "Your mother," Edward interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "Where did she die?" Shirley's expression darkened. "In a fire. Chicago. I was 8. That's what they told me anyway." "They?" "The people who found me after." Her jaw tightened. "Foster parents, state took me in. I ran when I was 16. Never looked back." Edward's chest constricted. His mind raced back to that night 12 years ago. The screams, the fire, the betrayal buried so deep in his own organization that he'd never seen it coming. Isabella had begged him to leave that life, to protect their daughter, to choose them over the empire. And he hadn't. Now, standing in the dying light of the Nevada desert, Edward Wallace, the man who controlled half of Las Vegas, who'd built a kingdom on fear and blood, realized the true cost of the choices he'd made. The daughter he'd mourned had been alive all along, surviving, suffering, alone, and the man responsible for it all was still out there, still breathing. The desert wind picked up, howling across the empty highway like something alive. Edward's world had narrowed to the woman standing before him, this ghost, wearing his daughter's face. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "The fire, your mother, all of it." Shirley pulled her wrist free from his grip, eyes flashing with defiance. I don't owe you anything. I fixed your car. We're done here. She turned to walk away. Please. The word stopped her. Men like Edward Wallace didn't say please. She glanced back, seeing something in his expression that made her hesitate. Desperation? Fear? Grief? What would you do if a stranger claimed to know your past better than you did? She sighed, crossing her arms. Fine, but make it quick. The fire, Edward pressed. When exactly did it happen? I was 8, maybe 9, Chicago, some row house on the south side. Shirley's voice was flat, reciting facts she'd repeated to social workers 100 times. They told me my mom didn't make it out, that I was lucky someone pulled me through a window. Edward's jaw clenched. Who pulled you out? I don't remember. The smoke. Everything was chaos. She looked down at the ring. This was the only thing I had left of her. The foster family let me keep it, probably because it looked worthless. And your father? Edward asked quietly. They never told you who he was? Shirley laughed bitterly. My mother apparently took that secret to her grave. The state had no records, no birth certificate with a father's name. I was a ghost in the system. Edward turned away, his hands trembling. The car bombing, 12 years ago. The night his world had burned. It came back in fragments. The restaurant parking lot. Isabella strapping Sophie into her car seat, the way his wife had looked at him one last time. Eddie, please, leave this life. For her, for us. He'd kissed her forehead, promised they'd talk about it tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. The explosion had lit up the Chicago skyline. By the time he'd arrived, there was nothing left but twisted metal and flames. The coroner had shown him 2 bodies, unrecognizable, charred beyond identification. He'd buried empty caskets and built an empire on vengeance. But what if the bodies had been someone else's? What if his daughter had been right there, pulled from the wreckage and lost in the system while he'd hunted ghosts? Could a father really fail to recognize his own child for 12 years? You're coming with me, Edward said suddenly, turning back to her. Shirley blinked. Excuse me? To Las Vegas. I have a penthouse, security, resources. His eyes locked on hers. And I think I know who killed your mother. She took a step back. You're insane. I'm not going anywhere with... That ring belonged to my wife, Edward interrupted. Isabella Wallace. She died 12 years ago in what I was told was a car bombing. But if you're standing here, his voice cracked, then everything I thought I knew is a lie. Shirley stared at him, her mind racing. This man, this dangerous, broken stranger, was either telling the truth or completely delusional. But something in his eyes reminded her of the way her mother used to look at old photographs when she thought no one was watching. Like she was mourning someone she'd lost. One night, Shirley said finally, you get one night to explain this. Then I'm gone. Edward nodded, relief washing over him. That's all I'm asking. They drove in tense silence, the Lincoln's engine humming smoothly thanks to Shirley's repair. She sat rigidly in the passenger seat, watching the desert blur past, wondering if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. Edward pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts until he found the name he needed. Marco Venti, his consigliere, his right hand for 20 years. The man who'd helped him build the Wallace Empire from the ashes of betrayal. The call connected. Eddie? Marco's smooth voice filled the car. Where the hell are you? The meeting with the commissioner. Something came up, Edward said carefully, glancing at Shirley. I need you to clear my schedule for the next few days. A pause. Everything all right? Just do it, Marco. You got it. Boss? Edward ended the call, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He didn't notice the way Shirley had gone pale. Didn't see the way her fingers trembled as fragmented memories clawed their way to the surface. A man's voice in the smoke. Strong hands pulling her through shattered glass. A whisper that had haunted her nightmares for years. The girl's still breathing. What do you want me to do with her? If you're as hooked as we are, hit that subscribe button, because what Edward doesn't know yet is that the man he just called might be the reason his daughter disappeared in the first place. Like this video, if you want to see how far a father will go for redemption, and share it with someone who loves a good thriller. The Wallace estate rose from the Las Vegas skyline like a monument to power, glass, steel, and marble gleaming under the city lights. Shirley stood in the penthouse elevator, watching the floor numbers climb, her reflection distorted in the polished brass doors. When they opened into the main living space, she froze. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the strip. White marble stretched beneath her feet. Modern art she didn't recognize hung on walls that probably cost more than most houses. Men in dark suits lingered near doorways, their eyes following her every move. Guest rooms down the hall, Edward said, loosening his tie. Second door on the left. There's clothes in the closet. Someone's old things should fit. Shirley walked slowly through the space, her worn sneakers squeaking on the pristine floor. She'd spent years sleeping on cardboard, eating from dumpsters, invisible to people who lived in places like this. Could wealth bought with blood ever truly shelter anyone? She didn't trust any of it. Not luxury, not the security, and especially not the man who claimed to be her father. Why should I believe you? She asked, turning to face him. Edward met her gaze. Because I'm going to show you something I haven't looked at in 12 years. His private study was smaller, darker, wood-paneled walls lined with books that actually looked red. Edward moved to a wall safe hidden behind a false panel, his fingers working the combination from muscle memory. He pulled out a single photograph, its edges worn from handling. This was taken 3 months before the bombing, he said quietly, handing it to Shirley. The image showed a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, holding a small girl, maybe 5 or 6, who was laughing at something off camera. The woman wore the same ring that now sat on Shirley's finger. Shirley's breath caught. The child's eyes. They were her eyes. Isabella, Edward said, his voice thick. Your mother and Sophie. You. Tell me what happened that night, Shirley whispered. Edward poured himself a drink, staring out the window at the city he controlled. Your mother wanted out. She'd begged me for months to leave the business, to disappear with her and start over. He took a long sip. I was arrogant. Thought I could have both, the empire and my family. His hand tightened around the glass. They planted a bomb in her car. Meant for me, they said. By the time I got there, it was just ash. The coroner identified 2 bodies. I buried them. Then I spent the next decade hunting down everyone connected to that night. Everyone? Shirley asked. Everyone I thought was responsible. His eyes darkened. But if you're alive, then I killed the wrong people, and whoever really did this has been breathing free air for 12 years. Shirley looked down at the ring on her finger, her mother's ring. Slowly, she slid it off, holding it up to the light. There's something, she squinted. A line. Inside the band. Edward crossed to his desk, retrieving a jeweler's magnifying glass. Under the lens, the faint seam became visible. A hairline crack in the metal that wasn't natural wear. His pulse quickened. Hold still. Using a letter opener, he carefully pried at the seam. The inner band separated with a soft click. Nestled inside, sealed in a tiny compartment, was a microchip no bigger than a grain of rice. "My God," Edward breathed. "Isabella, what did you hide?" Before either of them could speak, a sharp alarm cut through the room. The security system's alert for unauthorized entry at the private elevator. Edward's hand moved to the gun at his waist as he pulled up the camera feed on his computer. Marco Venti stood in the elevator, rising toward the penthouse. "Damn it," Edward hissed. "He wasn't supposed to be here." He snatched the ring and microchip, shoving them into his desk drawer and locking it. "Not a word about this," he said to Shirley. "Not to anyone. Understand?" She nodded, her heart racing. What was on that chip that had her mother hiding it in a ring? And why did Edward look so afraid of his own right-hand man? The elevator chimed. Marco stepped into the penthouse, his smile warm, but his eyes calculating as they landed on Shirley. "Eddie," he said smoothly, "you didn't mention you had company." Edward forced a smile, positioning himself between Marco and Shirley. "Just picked up a stray," he said. "Needed a mechanic on the highway. She helped out." Marco's gaze lingered on Shirley's face. Too long, too intense. "Funny," he said slowly. "She looks familiar." "Familiar?" Edward kept his voice casual, though every instinct screamed at him to get Shirley out of Marco's sight. "She's just a local mechanic. Helped me with the Lincoln." Marco's smile didn't reach his eyes as he stepped closer, extending a hand toward Shirley. "Marco Venti, pleasure to meet you." Shirley shook his hand briefly, feeling ice shoot up her spine. His grip was firm, controlled, but his eyes— have you ever looked at someone and felt your body scream, "Run"? His gaze swept over her face like he was cataloging every feature, searching for something. Recognition flickered there, just for a moment, before his expression smoothed into practiced charm. "You have kind eyes," Marco said softly. "Reminds me of someone I used to know." "Marco," Edward interrupted, his tone sharpening. "I thought you were handling the commissioner meeting." "Rescheduled it." Marco finally released Shirley's hand, turning to Edward. "When my boss goes radio silent and cancels everything, I get concerned, making sure you're all right." "I'm fine. I just needed some air. Clear my head." Marco's smile tightened. "Of course. Well, I won't intrude on your evening." His eyes flicked back to Shirley one last time. "Take care of yourself, Miss McDonald," Shirley said before she could stop herself. Something flashed in Marco's expression, so quick she almost missed it. Fear? Shock? "McDonald," he repeated slowly. "Common name. Well, good night." The moment the elevator doors closed behind him, Edward exhaled sharply. "That man's dangerous," Shirley whispered. "You have no idea." 2 hours later, Edward's hacker, a nervous kid named Danny, who worked out of a basement server room, had the microchip connected to 3 different computers. "Whoever encrypted this knew what they were doing," Danny muttered, his fingers flying across keyboards. "Military-grade security. But the files are old. 12 years, give or take." "Can you crack it?" Edward demanded. "Already did." Danny pulled up the first file. "You're not going to like this, Mr. Wallace." The screen filled with spreadsheets, shipping manifests, wire transfers, coded location markers. Edward leaned closer, his blood running cold as he recognized the roots. human trafficking networks, operating under Wallace syndicate fronts. "This isn't mine," Edward said quietly. "I never authorized." "Look at the authorization signatures," Danny said, highlighting a column. M. Venti. Marco's name appeared hundreds of times. Approvals, payments, contacts with military contractors and foreign buyers. All of it hidden beneath legitimate Wallace business operations. "That son of a bitch," Edward breathed. "He was running this under my nose the whole time." "There's more," Danny said, opening an audio file. "Recordings, dozens of them." He clicked play. Static crackled, then a voice emerged, soft, frightened, but unmistakably female. Isabella's voice. Shirley's head snapped up. "Is that your mother?" Edwards whispered, his hands gripping the desk. "Marco's been moving children through the Carson Street warehouse," Isabella's voice said, barely audible. "I found the ledgers, the routes. He's using Edward's name, his reputation, to traffic kids across state lines. If Edward finds out, Marco will kill him. Kill us both." A pause. Background noise. What sounded like a child crying. "Sophie, baby, Mama needs you to be brave, okay?" Isabella's voice cracked. "If something happens to me, if you survive, find the man with this ring. He's your father, and he's not the monster they say he is." The recording cut off. Edward's knees buckled. He caught himself against the desk, his face drained of color. What would you do if you realized your wife had died trying to protect you from your closest friend? "She knew," he rasped. Isabella knew Marco was dirty. She was going to expose him, take Sophie, and his voice broke. "Marco found out the bombing wasn't about eliminating me. It was about silencing her." Shirley's eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Her mother's voice, the voice she'd spent 20 years trying to remember, had just told her that her father wasn't the villain. The villain was the man who'd just stood in this penthouse, smiling. "He recognized me," Shirley said suddenly. "Tonight, Marco recognized me." Edward's head snapped up. "What?" "When I said my name, McDonald, he knew." Her voice hardened, "which means he knows I'm alive. And if he was willing to kill a woman and a child 12 years ago," Edward's jaw clenched, rage and guilt warring in his eyes, "then he'll try to finish the job." Do you think Marco already knows who Shirley really is? Drop your theories in the comments. And if you're as furious as Edward right now, smash that like button and don't forget to subscribe. The hunter is about to become the hunted. Share this with someone who needs to see how far betrayal can go. Edward requested the meeting at neutral ground, a private booth at Vespers, an upscale restaurant the Wallace Syndicate had owned for 15 years. The kind of place where conversations disappeared into leather upholstery and expensive wine. Marco arrived exactly on time, sliding into the booth with his characteristic ease. "You've been acting strange, Eddie," Marco said, signaling the waiter for scotch. "Everything all right?" Edward swirled his own drink, his face carefully neutral. "Been thinking a lot lately. About the old days. Dangerous pastime. About Isabella." Marco's hand paused halfway to his glass. Just for a second, but Edward caught it. "That's ancient history, my friend." "Is it?" Edward leaned back, his voice casual. 12 years this month since the bombing. Since I lost everything." He met Marco's eyes. "I've been wondering what really happened that night. How well do you really know the people you trust most?" Marco took a long sip of scotch, his expression unreadable. "You know what happened. The Bratva wanted you dead. They planted the bomb. We retaliated. You built an empire on their ashes. Right. The Bratva. Edward nodded slowly. Funny thing, though. We never found proof they ordered it. Just your word. The air between them shifted, subtle but deadly. Marco's smile didn't waver. But something cold flickered in his eyes. You questioning my loyalty, Eddie? After 20 years? Just asking questions an old man should have asked a long time ago. Marco leaned forward, his voice dropping. You wanted power, Edward. Don't pretend innocence now. Every choice you made, every body that dropped, every deal that went south, that was your empire. Your hands are just as bloody as mine. There it was. Not a confession, but close enough. Edward's jaw tightened. Never said they weren't. Good. Marco stood, buttoning his jacket. Then stop digging up graves. Some things are better left buried. He walked away, leaving Edward alone with the confirmation he'd feared. Marco wasn't just complicit in Isabella's death. He'd ordered it. That night, Shirley couldn't sleep. The penthouse felt like a cage, beautiful, expensive, but a cage nonetheless. She wandered the darkened halls, drawn by voices coming from the main living area. She crept closer, staying in the shadows. Two men stood near the bar, Wallace enforcers she'd seen earlier. Their voices were low, but carried in the quiet. Said the girl's a problem, one muttered. The boss wants it handled quietly. Which boss, Wallace or Venti? Does it matter? Orders are orders. Finish the job. Shirley's heart hammered. They were talking about her. She pulled out the old flip phone she'd carried for years. A battered thing she'd found in a gas station trash can, still somehow functional. Her hands shook as she held it up, recording. When? The second man asked. Tonight. Make it look like she ran off. No body, no questions. Would you run, or would you fight back? Shirley backed away slowly, her mind racing. She had to warn Edward, had to. Her foot caught a side table. A vase wobbled. Both men turned. Hey! She ran. 300 miles away, in a sterile FBI field office in Carson City, Agent Maria Cruz stared at her computer screen with growing disbelief. The DNA match had come back from a routine fingerprint scan. A soup kitchen in Henderson had been running background checks for volunteers. Standard procedure. But this print had pinged a cold case file buried in federal archives. Wallace Sophie, missing. Presumed deceased. Daughter of Edward Wallace, suspected organized crime figure. Mother, Isabella Wallace, deceased. File closed 12 years ago after confirmed deaths in Chicago bombing. Except the fingerprint was fresh. 2 weeks old. Cruz pulled up the surveillance footage from the soup kitchen. The camera was grainy, but clear enough to show a thin woman with dark hair, signing in under the name Shirley MacDonald. Garcia, Cruz called to her partner. Run this through facial recognition. Cross-reference with the Wallace family photos. 10 minutes later, the computer confirmed what Cruz's gut already knew. 87% match. Sophie Wallace was alive. And according to their latest intelligence, she'd been spotted entering Edward Wallace's Las Vegas penthouse 2 days ago. Cruz grabbed her phone, dialing her supervisor. We need a warrant, now, and a tactical team. On what grounds? Edward Wallace is harboring a federal witness, whether he knows it or not. And if she has information on the Wallace syndicate operations, Cruz's eyes gleamed. This could bring down the entire organization. Back in the penthouse, Shirley burst into Edward's study, breathless. They're coming for me, she gasped. Your men, Marco's men! I heard them! Edward was already on his feet, gun in hand. How long? I don't know, minutes, maybe. He pulled her toward the private elevator, his mind calculating exits, safe houses, people he could still trust. The answer to that last one was terrifyingly short. But what neither of them knew was that they weren't just running from Marco's assassins anymore. The FBI was closing in from the other side. And sometimes, the only thing more dangerous than your enemies is being caught between two wars you didn't start. The safe house was exactly what its name implied, a weathered structure 40 miles into the Nevada desert, surrounded by nothing but sand and silence. No neighbors, no witnesses, no one heard gunshots. Edward set a line of bottles on a makeshift fence post as the morning sun climbed higher. "You ever fired a weapon before?" he asked, checking the magazine of a Glock 19. Shirley shook her head. "I've run from plenty of fights. Never stood and fought back." "That changes today." He handed her the gun, his calloused hands steadying hers. "The world we're in now. Marco, the FBI, whoever else is coming, you need to be able to protect yourself." She felt the weight of it, foreign and terrifying. "Feet shoulder-width apart," Edward instructed, moving behind her. "Breathe, aim center mass, squeeze, don't pull." The gun kicked in her hands. The shot went wide. Again. They spent an hour like that, father teaching daughter a skill no parent should have to pass down. But with each shot, something shifted between them. The awkward distance of strangers dissolved into something deeper. Trust. Family. How long does it take to rebuild a bond that was stolen from you? "You're a natural," Edward said as Shirley shattered her third bottle in a row. She lowered the gun, a ghost of a smile on her face. "Uncle Leon used to say I had steady hands. Good for fixing things." Her smile faded. "Never thought I'd use them for this." Edward holstered his own weapon, studying her. "Your mother had steady hands too. She could diffuse any situation. Business deal, turf dispute, didn't matter. She saw solutions where I only saw threats." "Tell me about her," Shirley said quietly. "The real her, not just the woman in the photo." So he did. They sat on the safe house porch as the desert heat built, and Edward told stories about Isabella, how they'd met, her terrible taste in music, the way she'd refused to be afraid of his world even when she should have been. "She made me believe I could be something more than what I became," Edward said, his voice thick. "And when she died, I stopped trying." Shirley was quiet for a long moment, staring at the horizon. Then it hit her, a flash of memory so vivid it knocked the breath from her lungs. Fire, smoke, her mother's scream. "Shirley?" Edward leaned forward. "What is it?" "I'm remembering." Her hands trembled. "That night, the explosion. Don't force it. No." Her eyes squeezed shut. "I need to remember." The memories came in fragments, jagged and burning. Heat against her face, metal twisting. Her mother's hands unbuckling her seatbelt, pushing her toward a broken window. "Run, baby. Don't look back." Crawling through shattered glass. The taste of smoke. Distant sirens. A man's voice, rough and urgent. "Get the girl, before the cops arrive." Strong hands lifting her. A face she couldn't quite see through the smoke and tears. Edward gripped her shoulders gently. "Who pulled you out? Do you remember?" Shirley's eyes opened, wide with horror. "His voice," she whispered. "I know his voice." "Who? Shirley?" Her next word came out like a bullet. Marco. The name hung in the desert air like a death sentence. Edward stumbled backward, his face draining of all color. No, no, that's not. It was him. Tears streamed down Shirley's face. He pulled me out. I remember his cologne, the same one he wore last night, and his voice telling someone, "Get rid of her, make it look like she burned." Edward's legs gave out. He sank onto the porch steps, his hands shaking uncontrollably. 20 years. 20 years of brotherhood, loyalty, trust, all of it a lie. Marco hadn't just killed Isabella. He'd orchestrated everything. The bombing, the cover-up. He'd ripped Sophie from the wreckage and thrown her into the system like garbage, erasing her existence while standing beside Edward at the funeral, offering comfort, playing the loyal soldier, all while knowing Edward's daughter was alive and suffering. What kind of monster smiles in your face while destroying everything you love? "I'm going to kill him," Edward said, his voice hollow. Slowly, Shirley placed a hand on his shoulder, the first time she'd willingly touched him. "Not yet," she said quietly. "First, we make sure he can't run. Then we make him answer for everything." Edward looked up at his daughter, this fierce, broken, beautiful survivor, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 12 years. Purpose beyond vengeance. He had something to protect again. Someone to fight for, not just against. And Marco Venti was about to learn what happened when you stole from a man who'd already lost everything. Emergency syndicate meeting. Desert estate. Dawn. Attendance is mandatory. Edward's desert compound, a sprawling fortress 30 miles outside Las Vegas, had hosted these gatherings before. Territory disputes, expansion plans, executions. But never one like this. By 5 a.m., black SUVs lined the gravel drive. Edward's top lieutenants filed into the main hall. 12 men who'd built their fortunes on Wallace Syndicate blood money. And at the center of them all, wearing his signature charcoal suit and practiced smile, stood Marco Venti. "Hell of a time for a meeting, Eddie," Marco said, accepting a glass of whiskey. "What's so urgent? It couldn't wait until business hours." Edward stood at the head of the long table, his expression unreadable. "Patience, old friend. We're waiting for one more." In the adjacent security room, Shirley adjusted the guard's jacket Edward had given her, oversized, concealing, with a cap pulled low over her face. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Through the monitor, she watched the men settle into their seats. Watched Marco laugh at someone's joke, so comfortable in his deception. How does it feel to sit among people who trust you, knowing you're about to destroy them? Edward's voice came through her earpiece. "Ready?" She touched the ring on her finger, her mother's ring, now a symbol of everything stolen from her. "Ready." Edward poured himself a drink, letting the silence build. When he finally spoke, his voice cut through the room like a blade. "Gentlemen, we've had a rat in the family." The casual conversation died instantly. "A rat?" Marco's eyebrow arched. "That's a serious accusation, Edward. Do you have proof?" "I do." Edward's eyes swept the table. "Someone in this room has been running operations behind my back. Human trafficking, using Wallace resources, Wallace routes, Wallace reputation, all while I was kept in the dark." Murmurs erupted. Men shifted uncomfortably. Marco leaned back, his smile never faltering. "You've been paranoid lately, old man, seeing ghosts where there aren't any." "Ghosts?" Edward's laugh was cold. "Funny you should mention that." He nodded toward the door. Shirley stepped into the light. She pulled off the cap, letting her hair fall free. 12 pairs of eyes locked onto her, but only one pair went wide with genuine shock. Marco's face drained of color. "Recognize me?" Shirley said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "You should. You dragged me out of a fire once, 12 years ago. Right before you handed me off like trash and told my father I was dead." "Who the hell is this?" one of the capos demanded. "My daughter," Edward said quietly. "Sophie Wallace, alive, no thanks to the man sitting at my right hand." Marco's composure cracked. "Eddie, I don't know what she told you, but—" "Isabella recorded everything," Edward interrupted. "The trafficking routes, the payments, your voice giving orders." He pulled out a small speaker, pressing play. Marco's voice filled the room, captured 12 years ago on Isabella's hidden recordings. "The girl's still breathing. Get rid of her. Make it look like she burned with the mother." The room erupted. Chairs scraped. Hands moved toward weapons. Loyalties fractured in real time as men chose sides. Would you stand with a liar who made you rich? Or the truth that could destroy you? "You're dead, Edward," Marco hissed, reaching for his gun. "You and your bastard!" The front doors exploded inward. "FBI, nobody move!" Agent Cruz stormed in, 20 tactical agents fanning out behind her, assault rifles raised. Red laser sights danced across expensive suits. "Edward Wallace, Marco Venti, you're both under arrest." Chaos detonated. Marco's gun cleared his holster, swinging toward Edward. But Shirley was faster. She lunged, slamming into Marco's arm just as he fired. The bullet went wide, shattering a chandelier. Crystal rained down as she and Marco crashed into the table. Edward dove for cover as gunfire erupted. Syndicate soldiers against federal agents, the desert estate transforming into a war zone. Marco shoved Shirley off, his gun rising again, this time aimed directly at her heart. "Should have stayed dead, little girl." A single shot rang out. Marco stumbled backward, a red bloom spreading across his shoulder. Edward stood 10 feet away, his gun still raised, smoke curling from the barrel. "You don't touch my daughter," Edward said, his voice like gravel and broken glass. FBI agents swarmed Marco, forcing him to the ground. His scream of rage echoed through the hall as handcuffs clicked into place. Agent Cruz approached Edward, weapon drawn, but lowered slightly. "Mr. Wallace?" "It's over." Edward looked at Shirley, battered, terrified, but alive, and slowly raised his hands. "Yeah," he said quietly. "It is." The desert estate had become a crime scene. Agents zip-tying syndicate soldiers, reading rights, securing evidence. But Edward wasn't done yet. "Agent Cruz," he called out, his hands still raised, "before you take me in, there's something you need to hear." Cruz's eyes narrowed. "You're not in a position to negotiate, Mr. Wallace." "Not negotiating." Edward nodded toward Shirley. "Playing you the truth." Shirley pulled the microchip from her pocket, the one they'd extracted from Isabella's ring. She handed it to Edward, who held it up for everyone to see. 12 years ago, my wife discovered something that got her killed. She left behind insurance. He looked at Cruz. "You want the whole network? It's all here." "But you need to hear it from her." Cruz hesitated, then gestured to one of her tech agents. "Play it." The agent connected the chip to a portable speaker, routing the audio through federal recording equipment, everything streaming live to FBI headquarters. Static crackled. Then Isabella's voice filled the room, clear and urgent despite the years. "If you're hearing this, Edward, then I'm already gone. But you need to know the truth about Marco Venti. Every man in the room froze. Even the handcuffed soldiers stopped struggling. He's been running children through our shipping routes for 2 years. Military contracts, foreign buyers, diplomatic channels. He's built an empire inside yours. The ledgers are encrypted in this file. Names, dates, bank accounts. Everything you need to burn it all down. Marco thrashed against the agents holding him. Shut it off! This is fabricated evidence. And Edward, Isabella's voice softened, trembling with emotion. If you're hearing this, the monster isn't the man you became. It's the world that made you choose power over love. But it's not too late. You can still choose differently. You can still save our daughter. The recording ended. Silence pressed down like a physical weight. Agent Cruz's expression had shifted. No longer just hunting a criminal, but witnessing a tragedy that had spanned 12 years. Upload everything, she ordered her tech agent. I want that entire network identified and arrested by sunrise. Can you imagine carrying guilt for 12 years, only to hear your dead wife tell you there's still hope? Marco's face twisted with rage. You self-righteous bastard, he spat at Edward. You think turning on me makes you a hero? You're just as dirty. He surged forward, somehow breaking free from one agent's grip. Lunging toward Edward with a concealed blade none of them had found. Shirley's gun came up instinctively. The same weapon Edward had taught her to fire hours earlier. Her finger found the trigger. Marco was 3 feet away. One shot. That's all it would take. But Edward's hand covered hers, gently lowering the weapon. No, he whispered. You don't fix evil with bullets, Shirley. You fix it by ending the cycle. Marco crashed into them, but FBI agents tackled him before the blade could connect. This time, they weren't gentle. He hit the marble floor hard, screaming obscenities as they restrained him properly. Edward turned to Agent Cruz, pulling the microchip from the speaker and holding it out. Everything you need is on here, he said quietly. The trafficking networks, the corrupt officials, the military contacts, all of it. He met her eyes. This ends with me. I'll testify. I'll give you names, locations, everything. But my daughter walks away clean. She's a victim in this, not a criminal. Cruz studied him for a long moment. You're confessing to racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy, all of it, Edward confirmed. Every charge you can make stick. Just give her the life I couldn't. Shirley's eyes filled with tears. Dad. It was the first time she'd called him that. Edward's throat tightened. He turned to her, this fierce survivor who'd fixed his car and saved his soul. You were right, he said softly. Broken things can be fixed. You already fixed me. Agent Cruz nodded slowly. Take him into custody. Separate transport from Venti. As agents moved forward with handcuffs, Edward didn't resist. The Wallace Empire, built on blood, fear, and vengeance, fell in a single morning. But something else rose in its place. Truth, justice, and a daughter who had finally found her father, even if it meant watching him walk away in chains. Would you sacrifice everything for a child you just found? Tell us in the comments. If this hit you right in the heart, hit that like button and subscribe. 6 months had passed since the desert estate burned with gunfire and federal warrants. The Wallace Syndicate no longer existed. Its assets seized, its operations dismantled, its name reduced to a cautionary tale whispered in Vegas backrooms. 37 arrests had followed Edward's testimony. Trafficking networks spanning 4 countries had been exposed, and Marco Venti, the man who'd smiled while destroying lives, was serving life without parole in a maximum security facility where even his charm couldn't buy protection. But Edward Wallace wasn't in a cell. Agent Cruz had kept her word. In exchange for his complete cooperation and testimony that brought down not just his own organization, but 6 others connected to Marco's trafficking network, Edward had been placed in witness protection. He lived now in a modest cabin on the outskirts of Reno. No marble floors, no armed guards, no empire. Just silence, pine trees, and a view of the highway where semi-trucks rumbled past toward destinations he'd never know. The man who'd once controlled half of Las Vegas now spent his days reading, chopping wood, and waiting. Waiting for the first Saturday of every month. When his daughter came home. The sound of an engine climbing the gravel drive made Edward look up from the porch. A smile, genuine, unrehearsed, crossed his weathered face. Shirley's pickup truck pulled to a stop, its bed loaded with car parts and toolboxes. She climbed out wearing grease-stained coveralls and a Nevada Technical Institute cap. "Brought you something?" she called, hauling a refurbished alternator from the truck bed. Edward descended the porch steps. "You're spoiling that old Lincoln." "It's the car that started everything," Shirley said, grinning. "Least I can do is keep it running." She'd been working at Jimmy's Auto Repair in Henderson for 4 months now, full-time mechanic with plans to finish her engineering degree part-time. No more sleeping under bridges. No more hunger. No more invisibility. She had a life now, a real one. They spent the afternoon together like they did every month, working on the Lincoln, sharing meals, talking about everything and nothing. Edward told stories about Isabella. Shirley shared stories about her engineering classes and the customers at the shop. 2 people rebuilding what had been stolen from them, one conversation at a time. As evening approached, they sat on the porch, watching the sun bleed gold across the desert horizon. The same Nevada sky that had witnessed their first meeting on that empty highway. Shirley twisted the ring on her finger, the serpent and rose catching the fading light. "Mom used to say broken things can be fixed," she murmured. Edward nodded, his eyes reflecting decades of regret and 6 months of peace. She was right about most things. But, he smiled faintly, she was wrong about one thing. "What's that?" "Some things aren't broken," Edward said softly. "They're just waiting for the right person to find them again." Shirley leaned against his shoulder, something that had taken months to feel natural, but now felt like home. In the distance, headlights appeared on the highway. A truck hauling cargo toward somewhere new, leaving the past behind in a trail of dust and distance. How many second chances does one life get? "You think Mom would be proud?" Shirley asked quietly. "Of what we did?" Edward's throat tightened. "I think she'd be proud of what you did. You could have walked away that day, left me stranded. Kept the ring's secret buried. But I didn't." "No," he agreed. "You fixed more than just a car that day." The headlights faded into the horizon, carrying with them the last whispers of the Wallace name, a legacy of power, fear, and blood that would fade into criminal history textbooks. But the name MacDonald? That would endure. The name of a woman who'd loved fiercely enough to hide the truth in a ring. The name of a daughter who'd survived foster care, homelessness, and betrayal to find her way back to a father who'd lost everything. The name of survivors. As darkness settled over the desert, Edward and Shirley remained on the porch, watching stars emerge in the Nevada sky. The empire was ashes, but from those ashes, something purer had grown. Forgiveness, truth, and the quiet, radical act of choosing love over vengeance. Some stories end with kingdoms conquered. This one ended with a soul reclaimed. And sometimes, that's the greatest victory of all. Did this story hit you as hard as it hit us? Tell us in the comments what moment broke you the most. If you believe in second chances and redemption, smash that like button. Subscribe for more powerful stories about broken people finding their way home. And share this with someone who needs to remember that it's never too late to choose differently. Thank you for taking this journey with Edward and Shirley. We'll see you in the next story.